Now let's go to the next criteria, which is able to handle events triggered by components. So here the events are being triggered by a component. For example, let's go to our code. Here we have components called about and news components. Like these components are triggering the events, and how can we handle them when they are rendered in other component like app.js. For example, if I have about, and in about it's gonna trigger an event and it has to be handled with inside app.js. How can we do it? To explain that, let's clear all this code here and let's do it from scratch. I'm gonna leave the div as is, and I'm gonna take away all these functions and also these two, and I'm gonna empty the state as well, and I'm gonna create a new file named render text.js, and I'm gonna cut all this code and put it inside render text. Also I'm gonna import React here, React comes from npm, so we don't do dot slash there, and sorry, okay, we have everything. I'm gonna export default render text, so it is in its own file now. Now let's get with our criteria. So our criteria is handling events triggered by components. So quickly I'm gonna create about. I'm gonna use about component, and the about component has to trigger the event. Inside about I have a h1 here. Quickly I'm gonna replace this with, let's just say about, and when I click on this, I'm gonna use on click event. I'm gonna handle this on click event inside app.js. So whenever I click, the function has to be sent to app.js. My function will be actually I'm gonna create here first. So the function I want to name this is handle click equals this dot handle click, I'm gonna create handle click function, and inside what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna have some text here. For now I'm gonna say it's empty, or we can send this text as a prop. As just send text equals this dot state dot text. So the initial text can be click me, and this is sent to the props, so I can access and put it here, this dot props dot text. And when I click on click me, it has to be handled and the state has to be changed. Set state, and I'm gonna change the text value to clicked. So it's gonna say handle click. This handle click is sent. This is the handle click we are handling, and inside about.js I have to receive I have to send the event using handle click that is in props. So I'm gonna say this dot props dot handle click. Let's see if this works in our code. We quickly open here, module failed. Must be assigned a non-empty expression. Quickly open my console here. It's compiled successfully, but let me just quickly, oh yes, something happened, but when I refreshed it worked. So I'm gonna click here now, and there is error, set state of undefined. Okay, why do you think this happened? It's because we did not bind our function. I'm gonna quickly do that in our constructor. This dot handle click equals a quick solution for binding our function is to use arrow function. If we use arrow function, it's automatically binded, so we don't need to bind it every time. If I think we can try that. I'm gonna take this off and change this to an arrow function. Handle click equals an arrow function, just like that, and let's see if it works. See, it worked. It clicked. It changed to click. I'm gonna refresh and show you again. It says click me. I'm gonna click on this, and now it's changed to clicked. That's how we handle events triggered by components. Now let's move on to our next criteria, which says understand and discuss component lifecycle and ways to interact with component at those different lifecycle stages. So as you might have understood by now that React uses components, and every component has a lifecycle stages, and I have a pictorial representation here. So in a component's life cycle there are 3 stages called mounting stage, updating stage, and unmounting stage. Mounting stage is when a component gets rendered for the first time. Then it gets initialized using constructor, and then it gets rendered in like in the mounting stage. It also uses component did mount method. This is called only one time, only the first time when the component gets mounted. after getting mounted, the component can be updated. In the updating stage, whenever the component is updated, it calls the render function. It updates, and then it also uses component did update method. So whenever the component is updated, we can use this component did update method if we need to do any other updates we need. And also there is unmounting stage, where when we need to remove that component, then we can unmount it, and it also uses component will unmount method. Let's discuss more about these methods in using React's website. So in the mounting stage, all these methods go in an order. They follow or called in the following order when an instance of component is being created. So first it calls constructor, and then get derived state from props, and render method, component did mount method. So this component did mount is invoked immediately after component is mounted, that is inserted into the tree for the first time. So it is only called one time. And then in updating stage, it can get props that is dealt with this. And there is also a method called should component update. This should component update method returns a boolean value. If it is false, it does not execute component did update method, so it does not update. Only when should component update is true, our component will get rendered. Let me see. Is invoked before rendering. Default it is true, so by default this returns true, so our component updates every time if we don't use this function. If we are using this function and it returns false, our component will not update. And unmounting, it will unmount. If we are for example, if we are using any set intervals or APIs or any to close any servers, to like what do I say? Let's see. React no. I think before rendering, when new props are received, defaults to true. Okay, that's about that. If we want to stop any server or stop any interval or stop any clock, we can use component will unmount. Inside this we can stop them. And also one situation where we can use component did mount is whenever we are getting, we want to make a request to an API, and we need to make the request only when the component is mounted. As soon as the component gets mounted, we want to make some request to API. That kind of requests can be done using can be done inside component did mount. So we can make sure that component is mounted and then we are making the call to API. I wanted to share that point. Okay, that is about the life cycle methods. Let's see with an example. So I want to use method component did mount, and I want to console log mounted. Let me open the DevTools here quickly, and you can see mounted here. As soon as it's mounted, it shows mounted. And also I want to see component did update. It's just mounted but updated is not here. Okay, how can we re-render our component? Whenever the state changes, it gets updated, right? So I'm gonna click here and it says updated. So our state got updated. It's not mounted. And if I click again, it says updated twice here. So I'm updating it, but it's getting the same change. It's getting only clicked. Whenever I click, it gets clicked. So how many times I click, that many times it gets updated. And also if I say should component update method, and if I return false, my component will not update. See, it is mounted, but if I click this, no updates happen. I'm clicking it, but no updates are happening. When I return this to true, it says, okay, let me clear this and then refresh again. It says mounted, and if I click now, it gets updated because should component update returns true. That is about lifecycle methods. Now let's move on to our next criteria, which is able to create functional components and knows when they are ideal to use. Okay, functional components. Previously in our code we have only used class components till now, because every time we created a component we are using this structure: class, component name, extends component. These are called class components. There are also functional components where we don't use classes, we only make components as functions. For example, we can change this news component to a functional component. just by delete everything in here and say function news, and it returns a JSX. H1 news, just like that. And when we render this in our here, app is a class component, and I'm gonna render news here. It gets imported. See, I already have import. Okay, now if I render, look into my output. Okay, I don't have news, and I got to refresh this. I have news, and click me here, and quickly I'm gonna close this. Now news is a functional component, whereas this click me from about component is a class component. These are the two ways which we can represent our components. In my point of view, the higher order components, it's better to use the higher order components as class components and all the lower level components as functional components. These functional components are stateless. That means we are not specifying state here. We can just make the higher order component here app is our higher order component, which uses all these components, and all the low level components can be functional components. And we can make the higher order component use the state and make all the lower level components as stateless, because as you can see in this about, we are not using the state, we are just using the props. If I change this to a functional component, nothing changes. For example, if I say function about and it returns h1, and I'm gonna use props here. This props is what app uses as attributes here. These are the properties that are sent to our props argument. And if I refresh this, there is a type error, cannot read property props undefined. Okay, we are saying this, we need to say this here. We can take off this, and quickly, yeah, we can see if I click here, it says clicked. It works exactly the same, and it is a stateless function. That's the main use of functional components. Okay, the next one says to build a container or views that utilize many smaller components. We have already done that as in our code. Our div is like a container which has smaller components, news and about. We are rendering news and about components inside a container. The next one says able to debug React app. To do this, we can install an extension in Chrome like React Developer Tools. This extension helps us to debug our components. I can show in our output here. I have already have my extension. You can see components. In news component, it has no props here, but about we are you are sending a prop like a function, handle click function, and also text with which says click me, and whenever I click here it gets changed to clicked, so you can see it gets updated here too. That's how we can debug our React using this tool. Okay, now let's jump into our next criteria, which says able to use third-party packages and components. For this I am gonna use a React highlighter package. Quickly let's go into the readme section. It says we need to install it, and then we need to, here we are not gonna use require, but we are gonna import it into our component, and then we are gonna use this to highlight maybe brown here, and it also has some properties like this. These properties can be used. Okay, now let's copy this and then install it in our application. I'm gonna quickly stop the server and then paste our npm install react highlighter as a dependency. It's gonna take a while to install it. Meanwhile, let's copy this. Okay, it's installed now, and now we've got to import it into our application. Import, say, highlight from highlighter react highlighter. Okay, now let me quickly copy this sentence, where in this sentence it's gonna search for brown and then highlight brown. I think we have everything. Let's see if it works. I'm gonna quickly okay, I'm gonna start the server again, npm start, and it's gonna open my web page, and it's loading. There you go, it's got highlighted. I'm gonna close the dev tools. You can see brown is highlighted. If I say search for dog with small case, it's gonna say highlighted dog. This is how we install third-party packages into our React application. Okay, now the next criteria says able to use inline styles and CSS to style components. Okay, how can we use inline style? To do inline styles, we got to do them on our elements, not on the components. The elements here will be h1. So if I say style equals, and to specify style I'm gonna use curly braces, the JavaScript expressions can be written in curly braces, but here my style is using classes and like background color. All these styles has to be specified inside an object. They have to be written like an object. So I'm gonna put one more curly braces and say background color. Here we have to use camel case to write our styles. Yellow. Let's see if it is working. Gonna refresh. Okay, it did not work. Am I doing it wrong? I think it's correct. Or let's say color. Hello. Yes. Let's put it red. We cannot read yellow on white. Now it got changed to red. Why did background color did not work? It has to be camel case. There we go. It's got background color red. And it the criteria also says to use CSS to style components. Here I'm gonna quickly create a folder named styles. Inside styles I'm gonna create let's say news.css. So I'm gonna say color let's create a class called color class and or maybe font class color white font size 30 pixel. And how can we get that style here? It's easy. You just have to import from import styles slash news. Okay, capital N case styles slash news. Why am I not getting this? So how can I import? Let's do this quickly. by saying, okay, let's move the CSS outside here and quickly try to import it. Okay, it compiled, and now we got to use the class name. Use the class to in React. To use class, we have to specify class name, and the class name will be font class. Okay, it compiled. Don't know if it is working. Let's change this to 10 pixel. Yeah, it's working. Now let's change this to 50 pixel. It is working. So that's how we import our CSS and then add our CSS or inline styles to our components. No, we got to give them to our elements. Now let's look at the last two criteria, which are about making API requests and getting data, and then use that data and populate it in a component. Okay, to do this, I'm gonna use an API request response API, and I'm gonna get a single user 2, only data of a single user. And to do that, I'm gonna use Axios here. Axios is an npm package. With this, we can easily make API requests using Ajax. Let's get started with that. In our app.js, let's clear out everything we have quickly. I'm gonna take away all the functions that we wrote. I'm gonna close this here, and the state is also clear here. Okay, now let's get started. If you can remember, when we talked about lifecycle stages of a component, the stage where we make an API request is after mounting the component. After mounting the component, there is a method called component did mount. So it makes sure the component is mounted, and inside that method we can make API request. So to do that, quickly I'm gonna say component did mount function. Inside here I'm gonna make a API request using this. But first I need to install Axios. To do that, I have to npm install Axios. Let's quickly do that. Stop the server, say npm install Axios, and then we import Axios into our application. To perform a get request, we have to first import it and then use it. So it is installed successfully. Now I'm gonna import Axios from Axios, just like that. And inside component date mount, I'm gonna use the get method and say, as this is a function, let me just put it in a separate function named get user, which is an asynchronous function, as we are dealing with promises. And the URL will be our just like that. That's our URL. We are gonna await. Right, and then we are gonna call this get user inside our, and this has to return a response. Let me see if I'm doing it correctly. Let's copy this. Async await, we are using async and await. So I'm gonna quickly paste that. Unexpected token. Copy this real quick and then paste it in my URL here. So whenever the component gets mounted, I want to call get user, and it's gonna return a response. This response. Okay, now const user get user, and let's console this and see what we are getting. Let's put this at the end. Maybe here. Yes. Okay. Now let's go to our project here real quick and then refresh. Okay, we got to start. npm start. Failed to compile, response is not defined. Okay, this response has to be returned. And it's also console logging response before we return it. Let's comment this real quick and let's see what we got to call. This is returning a promise, so we got to await get user. Okay. So inspect and see, we are getting an object. Object has data. Data has another data with ID and avatar, email, first name. Okay, that's good. Now let's console log user clear this, and I'm gonna take away this one, refresh, getting console log user. Let me quickly put it in quotes. It says user undefined. Let's return response here, and the return response must be stored in user. And now I think we got it. The user has an object with data. Inside data there is another data object. That data has another data. That's a lot of datas. And we can retrieve first name and email address using that, or first name and last name. Okay, now user's full name to be displayed here. Okay, now let's say user, let's create a state with an empty string. After getting this user, I'm gonna say this dot set state user with user dot data dot what can it be? Data dot first name. Let's say first name here, and let's display this dot state dot user. User's first name. Okay. Let's take off one data and see. Okay, let's get user dot data. Data dot first underscore name, so it is going to be first underscore name. Okay, I got the first name here. Good. Okay, now I'm gonna create first name and one more key, last name as empty strings, and I'm gonna say first name just like that, comma, last name colon user dot data dot last underscore name. Let me double check that. It is last underscore name. Okay, user's full name is first name space this dot state dot last name Janet Weaver. And now if I change the ID to 3, it's gonna get new data, Emma Wang. Okay, that's how we display data from an API. Get the data and display it. I think we covered all the criterias in our batch, and we have successfully completed our React batch.